All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful, and this week feels especially wonderful in some respects, world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host. Thank you very much for tuning in. We could have a long one here, folks, and believe me, the irony of me saying that, not knowing how long this is, to you, who does know how long this is not lost on me. There is some quasi-dramatic irony going on there. Is dramatic the most appropriate? Dramatic irony is stuff known by the audience but not known by the players, right? So maybe, but again, because I'm sitting here recording, speaking more or less freeform, I don't know how long this is going to take. Um, but you, in the future, know exactly how long this took. So, what do we got tonight? There's not a lot of individual items on the agenda this evening. But UFC 300 was last night as I record this, and normally I can count on being able to go through a bunch of a card fairly quickly because there's usually at least four fights that don't need a lot of discussion and that I can sum up in a couple of sentences. Maybe one or two interesting things, maybe a fight just sucked, and then we just kind of press forward. Um, I'm not saying there weren't some pedestrian fights at 300. There were. Um, there was one pretty bad fight, and there were a few that were, just kind of there, but really only like two or three. And even at least one of those I have to talk about a little bit for some reasons. You can guess which ones those are ahead of time, and we'll just see how this goes. So that's going to take a bit of time. But that's it. There is no UFC event this coming weekend, so nothing to preview. And UFC 300 was just swallowing up the news cycle, so not a lot of news, but a little bit. Again, a little bit of news there. So that's what we're looking at here, folks. So if you could please interact with the product a little bit, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, whatever is applicable to your podcast platform of choice. If you've done any and all of that, or if you haven't and want to do something else, I completely understand. Grab your social media platform of choice and let people know. Share the show. It's always appreciated. I think that's it. As far as preamble, I don't. Just as a, if I sound a little little fatigued, I'm doing this late on Sunday because I had stuff. I had stuff. I had a very busy Saturday that started earlier than most of my Saturdays do, and then UFC 300, which was bless John Anik for being so tired at the end of this that he just swore on air. But when talking briefly about Alex Pereira, and we'll get to this. But Pereira said he wants to fight on UFC 301, and I think Rogan mentioned that's a set card, isn't it? We can't just throw him on there, right? It's already long, and Anik just, well, we've already been here for 8.5 effing hours. Um, Now they had to be there early. They had to be there a little bit earlier. I mean, production always does. But I got thinking about it, and my normal assumption is six. Right, 6 hours start to finish. That one started at 4, and yeah, that was close to 8 because 6 hours would be 10, and I know it was after 11. Now, I'm not sitting here and complaining, all right? There were some quality fights. That was a long card. Um, so there was that. But so that took a while, and then today I've been busy, and if I'm a little, I I didn't want to wait and do this in the morning because I got stuff on Monday. I mean, I don't have the busiest life in the world, but I record these when I do because I know I always have this time, and sometimes the rest of my day just makes it a little bit less easy. But fortunately, UFC 300 has a lot to talk about, a lot that I'm excited to talk about. So if this was a really humdrum card, like I'd be having to power through this instead of very happy to get into it. So, but if I don't sound, other people I bring that up also because other people talking about this are justifiably very animated, and I don't know how much of that you're going to get from me tonight. I'm a little tired. I'm a little sleep deprived, and I have to do this now because this is the time I have to do it. So. I thank you for bearing with me in that respect. All right, that's enough of my preamble and preemptive excuses. Let's jump into this one, shall we? UFC 300. The big, Giannick used the right word. It was like tricentennial. One of those two. Forgive me for forgetting. The UFC made this a big deal. Now, in doing so, they somewhat overhyped it. They couldn't get some of the fights they wanted. I don't think it's really unfair to say that the original plan was pretty clearly Alex Pereira and Jamal Hill at UFC 301. I saw some people bagging on 301 as a very poor pay-per-view card. Look, the first three pay-per-views of 2024, UFC 289, UFC 299, and UFC 300 have all been good. I mean, 300 is exceptional. I can say that in events done, exceptional card. 299 was great. 298 was very good. Compared to those, is 301 a step down? Yes. There's a few things I want to talk about before we get into the fights in particular, so I hope you'll bear with me here. I saw a few people mention in the aftermath of this. The question kind of got raised a few different times. Could the UFC do this more often? The reality is yes, but not really. Let's take a look at, if you look at this card, top to bottom, there's at least 3 fights on this card that could easily main event a fight night. That could easily main event a fight night where you have to sell tickets. And a couple of these could have easily main evented other pay-per-views. The UFC went out of their way to make this special, to try do everything they could to make this special, including bumping the bonuses up to $300,000. And there is nothing that will reinforce. This is the weirdest thing about conditioning, by the way. You may not believe me about this, but if you don't want to take my word for it, look up the literature on this. Random reinforcement of conditioning is actually better than consistent. Now, forgive me, I can't remember whether that's for operant or classical, because one of them is pairing an automatic response with an unrelated stimuli. Right? The classic experiment is Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov pairs the sight and scent of food with the ringing of a bell. Does this enough that every time the dogs hear a bell ring, they salivate. But if you're trying to condition behavior, randomly reinforcing this is actually more efficient at getting people to do what you want them to do than consistent. I don't know why this works. Other people who are better into the neurochemistry than I am can tell you. But I bring that up to say that if you're the UFC, they actually get more mileage out of their, I'm going to call it exploitative, but please understand I'm not entirely sure that's the most accurate word. There's a degree to which you could argue I'm being overly critical there. But the UFC can get more mileage out of, this is accurate, underpaying their fighters with sporadic, random generosity, it engenders the behavior they want. More so than if they just raise, and again, this is just about human behavior. If they just raised their every bonus, if every bonus every time was $300,000, one, they wouldn't actually lose that much money. This would barely be what it would. Somebody did the math on this. It would actually barely be like 1% more eating into their profit, not revenue, profit. They make more than enough money to do that and still be incredibly successful. Okay, and again, the math on that is very clear. But they can they can engender goodwill with sporadic, intermittent generosity and still keep pay low generally. And this will, again, it perpetuates. It actually fosters the behavior that they want more than consistent reinforcement. And it's weird. I don't know why it works that way. I don't know why our brains are that way, but this is just how it works. So they did that. Point being, they went out of their way on this one. And let's be honest about the following. Look, it was a long slog to get here from UFC 299. Those cards between 299 and 300 were the dregs. I was actually a bit more optimistic about a couple of them on paper. Shouldn't have been, turns out. You could take a couple of fights from this card, could have given better main events to any of those, and in one case I think should have. We'll talk about that. And you would have raised the general level of excitement and talent and quality of cards, but you would have decreased the peak that was 300. And that's just not a trade they're willing to make most of the time. So understand, the UFC could do this more often, but everything else would be a lot worse. And I don't know which I'd prefer, if I'm being honest. I don't know. And the other thing about that is, look, man, UFC 300 never lost a fight. Somebody else looked this up. How long has it been since a UFC card, certainly UFC pay-per-view, went off as it was presented? Every other pay-per-view from here, like going back several, there's at least one fight that falls out. There's at least one visa issue, one drug test, one weight issue that causes a fight to be canceled. Everybody made weight. There was not a single fight that fell out. There was not a single weight miss. That is rare these days. So they went out of their way on this, and you're just not going to be able to do that every time out. It is more possible for the UFC to put forth more effort on a more consistent basis than they do, which is the other thing. Like, some overly cynical people the reaction to this being, oh, the UFC is still capable of producing magic, they're just on autopilot so often that they don't. And slightly overly cynical one. The UFC is beholden to the machinery they built, and the machinery they built requires, I think it's 12. I think it's 12 pay-per-views a year for ESPN, and an additional 30 other events, other fight nights. They're on the hook for 42 events a year, pretty much minimum, to make the bulk of their money, because the ESPN deal does account for I think the majority of it. Certainly the largest plurality, like the largest single chunk. And they're beholden to that. It is a money-making operation. But there are consequences of the product for that. And they can still make magic, but it's harder to make magic under the conditions that they've set up. Easier to make money. Much easier to make money. Harder to make magic. And frankly, if you're the UFC, you'd rather make money. And throw out the magic on occasion, right? That they're winning. The UFC's won everything, basically. So there was that. What else I'm going to touch on here? I think that was it as far as the overall structure went. Oh, last thing, and then I'll get into my predictions and how all that went and whatnot. Um, I very rarely put over the Las Vegas fight crowd, most of the time because they suck. On an average UFC event, especially pay-per-view or fight night or whatever, held in Las Vegas, pretty much until like the first 4 or 5 fights on a card look like a bomb scare, not a major MMA event, because nobody's there. It's not really full until we get to the main card, and once things kind of get going, they're okay. But like on balance, I don't. Vegas fight crowds are real spotty. For this event, give them credit where it's due. The crowd was there. There were several thousand people there for the first fight of the night, and I can't tell you the last time I saw that in a Vegas card. Now, you go overseas or to some of these markets that get, one event a year. And yeah, they'll be pretty full for that first fight, especially if it's a good one. But you almost never see it in Vegas. You almost never see it on an average fight night. But crowd was there from the first one for this one. Hats off to you guys. Like the crowd all night, pretty darn good. I'm on the production. They said the UFC was gonna have a blue canvas for this, and what they had was a more bluish gray. So there was that. The UFC opening the early prelims with their old intro, not their oldest intro, but there was an intermediate one that featured a few highlights from throughout the years, with a musical score and things breaking down, and then a bunch of flags and making. It's really cool. That coming back was nice. I saw some people, and I will just say there were people I liked who expressed this opinion. When they when the UFC started the not the main card, but when they started the bulk of the prelims, not the early ones, but the ESPN prelims, they used the old Gladiator intro, which I haven't seen in a long time. And I don't dislike the Gladiator intro. What I hate about the Gladiator intro is it always you have this kind of orchestral score and a bit of a choir going for a while, and then somebody talks, somebody else talks, like just back and forth, talking points from interviews. And then they go into Face the Pain, which is one of the worst songs in human history. I have friends who play around with like AI generated songs. I've never heard an AI generated song worse than Face the Pain. I hate that song so much. But I know people, even there are longtime fans, I think, who had their nostalgia button kind of pushed on this one. And I get it, and I forgive you. You can't tell me, though, that if you had to listen to that piece of crap every event again, because I was there when that was the thing. I was around when every intro was the Gladiator into Face the Pain, and I hated it. I always hated that song. This is not a new thing for me. Go back if you can go back into the archives on this program. Feel free to jump in the Wayback Machine and find them. Hate this song. Hate it. But a lot of people kind of popped because, hey, nostalgia. And nostalgia is the currency of the age. For mostly worse. They used the old UFC 1 graphics in some of their intro packages, especially early when talking about the different fights. That was cool. The UFC went out of their way to try and make this feel special. And this was an overhyped fight card in some respects, but that's down to the people hyping it. This was always an excellent card on paper. When I was a little critical of it, I was only critical of you came out and said this is going to be the best thing you've ever seen on paper, and it wasn't. I'm sorry, this is not the best hypothetical fight card I could put together on paper. It's not. The UFC had to deal with realities, and the reality is they put together on paper an excellent pay-per-view card. And what they got was incredible with a handful of duds. Not even a handful of duds. One dud. One real dud. And a couple of other fights that kind of got forgotten a little bit. Sometimes unfairly, sometimes because, well, nothing can be perfect. So, but they went out of their way on this one. Thumbs up on the vast majority of this, except Face the Pain. That deserves to be relegated to memory that you can dismiss as your sure thing, Grandpa. They used to use a crappy new metal song that no one's ever heard of before in the UFC intros. And come on over here and sit down. But yeah, so but on the whole, from with what they did with the production and everything here, big thumbs up. When the UFC wants to, they can still do some interesting things, and they proved that here. So thumbs up to everyone involved there. Good stuff. All right. As for my predictions, I went positive, 8-5. What did I get wrong that annoyed me? I kind of knew I was going to get that Green and Miller fight wrong. I picked Miller because I do. But that was always a really uphill fight, and it played out that way, but we'll say that. Turner and Moicano, I'll explain why. No, you know what, let me do this here very briefly. Turner just cannot get consistent. He is very talented. You can see flashes of real ability and real brilliance. But Renato Moicano is a fairly consistent machine. And he's got a ceiling, and there's no denying that. But you can't be uneven when you fight that guy. And he's really settled into lightweight. I usually forget a little bit how tall he is. He's 5'11" for lightweight. That's on the taller end. So I maybe should have that one, especially kind of how it went. It really left a sour taste in my mouth. The other one I got wrong that annoyed me. Is there another one? Because okay, so for the record, I got what was I wrong about? Okay, I was wrong about Miller and Green. I was wrong about Cater and Sterling. That one, I maybe should have got that one right. I was wrong about Moicano and Turner. I was wrong about Oliveira and Saryukian. I can't be mad about that one. It was just a close enough fight to be 2-1 either way. I actually thought Charles won that one. But I don't think it's wrong to go 2-1 for 29-20 either way is fine. That one should have been 5 rounds. That really should have been a big fight night main event. Like that should have been your ESPN main event for one of these other previous cards. So there was that. And Gaethje and Holloway I got wrong. And I'm not mad about that one iota. So I think only the Turner and Moicano one, partially for how it went down. And I should have been a lot more skeptical about Cater given how long he was off and some of the fights he's had. Some of those were just really tough fights that I think might have worn on him a bit. But anyway, ultimately 8-5. I'll take it. I've told you guys before, my goal is to be better than 50-50 at the end of this. That's really all I want. To be in the positive side of things. There were no contests, no draws. Every fight went off. Year to date, I am now 107-53 with 3 no contests. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Coming out positive on this card, honestly, I'm really happy with. There were some There were some tough fights on this one to kind of figure out. So, last thing before I get into fights in particular, I did have internet problems. I missed the entire Bo Nickel and Cody Brundage fight. I watched it since, so I have a few things to say. And I missed about half, or not quite half. I got some real spotty viewing of Oliveira and Saryukian. So that's one of the reasons I'm not going to get up in arms over the scoring, because I also didn't, doing it live, I didn't have a great sense, and having rewatched it, I arrived at the same conclusion. Like, yeah, I still kind of think it should have gone to Oliveira, but I I just can't get mad over 29-28 for either guy. I can't get mad at that. So, all right, but that's enough of how the predictions have gone. Let's talk about the fights. Main event, UFC light heavyweight title, Alex Pereira knocks out Jamal Hill, 3:14 of round one. Um, Man, what do you say about Pereira? Pereira is such an aberration. Man, he has not even been in the UFC that long. You understand something about this man? His UFC debut was November of 2021. He's not even 3 years into his UFC career. And he's a two-weight world champion, has only gone he's gone the distance twice, but he won the middleweight belt by stopping Israel Adesanya. He moved up. He won the light heavyweight belt by stopping the former champion. They're fighting for the vacant belt, and then stopped the other immediate former champion in the first round. Somebody mentioned this. That man had the rivalry with Adesanya, then moved up to light heavyweight and avenged the two losses that were handed to his chief MMA trainer, I believe, Glover Teixeira. That man's life is kind of a movie, right? A little bit. This on top of a very, very decorated Glory kickboxing career. Uh, you just People just don't do what Alex Pereira is doing in the sport. Like, that's super rare. I mean, if you're crying out loud, Cody Brundage has more fights than Alex Pereira in MMA. Just think about that for a second. And Alex Pereira is a two-weight world champion who just successfully defended the light heavyweight title in spectacular fashion. Fight itself, they're open stance because Hill fights southpaw, which changes a little bit how Pereira throws the calf kick, because normally it's power leg into lead leg if you're close stance. So he's having to do a little bit of either a switch or a step up to throw the lead leg into the outside, and he's doing okay with it. Hill fires a few, but there's a lot of probing early. Then around the 3-minute mark, because this ends at 3:14, so very close to the 3-minute mark, Pereira seems to really figure everything out he needs to figure out about Jamal Hill. Pereira had been jabbing to the body, which is a great way to set up the left hook, also a good way to set up the right overhand. He leans a little bit more on the left hook than the overhand, but it will set up either punch. That's all I wanted to mention there. Then he checks like 3 kicks in a row. He checks an inside leg kick, he checks an outside leg kick, he kind of cross-checks a body kick, and he just walks forward. And Hill fires another body kick. It kind of, I think it's a body kick. Might have been more of an inside leg kick, but either way, it kind of catches no, it was a body kick. Kind of catches the cup. And Pereira reaches down, adjusts the equipment, and that's also kind of to say, hey, you kicked me low. And Herb Dean, referee, comes over and is like, hey, timeout, low blow, and Pereira doesn't even take his eyes off of Jamal Hill. Just puts his right hand out like, no, we're good. Last time I saw someone do something like that was Demetrius Johnson. I think the second fight with John Dodson. Dodson kicks him low, and DJ reacts a bit to it. Referee comes over like, hey, timeout, and Johnson just wait like, nope, we're good. I'm good. Keep going. Don't want to give him the break. And proceeded to resume beating up on John Dodson because Demetrius Johnson. This was you see guys kind of wave off the low blow on occasion, but it's usually the ref will break things up a little bit. This was not at all. Herb Dean comes up, kind of makes the time symbol, and Pereira just like peripheral vision sees this, reaches out, right hand like, nope, stay out of it. I'm good. That wasn't a bad shot. And Herb Dean just kind of half steps back. So I don't even think they stopped the official clock. Then Pereira comes forward a little bit. He's starting to hand fight. Again, a lot of hand fighting when you're opposite stance. He gets a hold a little bit of the wrist of Hill, pulls down the lead hand, and then steps forward just a bit and a left, sort of a shovel hook. It's not a traditional like flat or level hook. It kind of comes up. It's more of a shovel hook. Doesn't matter. Boom on the face. Drops him, but the ref wants blood now, so he gets on top and lands hammer fist until Hill goes unconscious. Hill barely missed a left hand in this exchange. Like part of the reason the left hook from Pereira was as damaging as it was would have been bad no matter what. But Hill also squares up, not with his feet, but with his shoulders, throwing the power hand. And that even removes a little bit more of his defense. But if that punch had landed, things might have gone differently. There's an element of Pereira's punching defense, specifically punching. He's pretty darn good about checking or otherwise mitigating kicks. Again, he'll move his leg out of the way, he'll cross-check, he'll minimize the impact just by turning the leg out. Like there's a lot of stuff he does with that. When it comes to the pure boxing, not a lot of head movement from Pereira, and there are a handful of defensive tendencies he has that have gotten him hit and hurt in the past, both in MMA and in kickboxing. His overall kickboxing is very strong, obviously. And if you're out there going, well, who in the heck are you to note this? And I'm not here saying I'm noticing a habit and a pattern. That's all. This man is clearly an exceptional fighter, and he clearly knows what he's doing. But there is everything you do there's give and take. Part of what he does, he's very upright, which is not uncommon for kickboxers. And he doesn't move his head a whole lot. Doesn't mean not at all, but his hands are a little bit lower, and there's not a lot of defensive movement. Now, you don't need a lot to be effective with it, to be clear there. But there are openings to land on that man. It's just terrifying to exchange with him. So I just say that for reference. But his power is, dude. There's no. We're very used to, especially in MMA, a lot of big power shots having kind of big motion. Yeah, occasionally you get something that's really like technically smooth and lands and does big damage, but a lot of it is more, a little bit of a wind up, a little bit more of an arc. A little bit like, I don't mean this as an unkind comparison, because there's a lot of technique that went into what happened with Gaethje and Holloway. But their final sequence in particular, it looks like a lot of haymaker. And again, some of this is how we doing with the range. And there is a lot of technique going on there, especially with movement and small angle shifts within the pocket. But so when I just say that, Pereira generates absurd power with really smooth, really short motions, he didn't load up on this at all. he's clearly driving a little bit from his hips, but he's not. Look at how this thing lands. He's not. Sometimes you see guys land a punch and they throw so hard they get out of position. Afterwards, even if they land, none of that. He is just. Uh, he is a destructive force in there. And this punch wasn't even the cleanest left hook he's ever landed. He just hits that hard and landed. Uh, there's a cliche that it's true. It's true that being hit when you're not expecting it is what will really hurt you. It's the ones you don't see that hurt. It's because you're not expecting it. Believe it or not, it's not that hard to not get knocked out. That sounds really weird, but hear me out for just a second. If your goal when you go in to fight or to spar or to whatever is to just not get knocked out, you can achieve that. If you're in a real fight, you might get TKO'd because part of not getting actually knocked unconscious is a lot of just defense, and if all you're doing is defending, you're kind of going to get stopped because that's not really, you're not supposed to do that when you fight. But like by way of example, there was a streamer who did a sparring session with Sean Strickland, and Sean Strickland beat the crap out of this guy, but he never dropped him. And Strickland is much bigger and like, champion. He was champion at the time. This might have been just after he lost, but I think it was in the build-up to his title defense with Dricus du Plessis. And so how does this, like, not untrained, I don't mean to say that this streamer was untrained, I think it was Sneeko. Clearly a little bit of at least a hobbyist level of martial arts training. So he probably sparred before, clearly never with someone of Strickland's caliber, but enough to know a little bit how to defend. Enough to know, like, okay, I'm getting hit, but I'm not going to turn my back completely. So, there's been a little bit of experience there. Again, hobbyist level, which is fine. I don't say that pejoratively. I say that as a classification, because there is a world of difference between the hobbyist martial artist and the professional martial artist, and that's fine. Not everyone can be a professional at this. It's not easy. And there's nothing wrong with being a hobbyist. Nothing at all. In fact, the majority of people who practice martial arts are hobbyists rather than professionals. But Sean Strickland, bigger than this guy, stronger than this guy, much better fighter all around than this guy, and Sneeko, I think. And he couldn't drop him. Or, knock him out. And he unloads on him. But, again, kind of like, shouldn't you have... There was a little bit of like, shouldn't you have, really hurt that guy? The answer is no, because if you know a little bit about what you're doing, it's easy to not get knocked out. Part of the conceit you're making there is I'm not going to open myself up. Jamal Hill is not an easy man to beat. That shouldn't be a complicated proposition there. Not an easy man to beat. But he got hit at the wrong time with a punch I don't think he was really expecting. That's bad even if you're not fighting a guy who hits as hard as Pereira does. Fighting a guy who does hit that hard, oof. Oof. Real bad. So Pereira wins in short order. Looks really darn good. Says after the fight he really wants to fight in Brazil at UFC 301. Here's a thought. Unless there's some medical condition that he accrued here, and I don't know that there is, but like if he broke something that we didn't see, because you can break something small. You could bust a finger, have a hand injury, foot injury. If there's something like that he's going to get fixed and not fight through, okay, but like he didn't get hit. Not really. Didn't get cut, didn't get again, kind of concussed or anything like that. So unless there's an unknown medical part of this, let him. UFC 301 could use the help. It really could. Throw that guy on there. He also said he would like to try his hand at heavyweight. This actually makes things easier for the UFC, believe it or not, in my opinion. Because you don't have to look at Yuri Prochazka. We'll get to his fight later, but he did win. And say, well, you got cut up and a little bit beat up in that fight. You going to be ready on a short turnaround for UFC 301 in the title fight? And I'm sure Yuri would say yes, because he's that guy. But if he's got cuts that aren't properly healed, they medically won't let you, nor should you, for the record. Let your cuts heal properly. That's, especially if you fight, that's important to let that get done. So that seems to be, but you don't need to try and find somebody that can make weight. If Pereira says, let me take a heavyweight fight, I'll bolster UFC 301. Guys, I'm fine. You have a boatload of crappy heavyweights on this roster. Get him anyone ranked like 6 to 12. Let's see what he can do. Maybe he can't win that fight. I shouldn't say can't. Maybe he doesn't win. But your heavyweight division is populated with these. It's heavyweight. You know my opinions on that division as a general rule. So let's just, for the sake of argument here, look at heavyweight. So if we start at 6, let's look at 6 through like 12 or 13, okay? Because I don't think you want to do top 5. Who are we looking at here? So we got Jones, Aspinall, Gane, Pavlovich, Miocic, and Blades. I'm okay letting that group sit out of this discussion. I mean, maybe one of them wants it, fair enough, but for the sake of argument. 6 is Alexander Volk. We got, in order, Alexander Volkov, Jailton Almeida, Marcin Tybura, Sergey Spivak, Tai Tuivasa, Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Derek Lewis, and then Alexander Romanov at 13. If we want to, just for the sake of argument, go all the way to 15. Marcos Rogerio de Lima, and then Rodrigo Nascimento. You really want to sit there and tell me with a straight face that you couldn't just throw him against any one of those guys? And one, you don't like his chances. I actually like his chances in most of those. Who don't I like his chances against there? Hang on. Volkov would be tough. Not unbeatable, not impossible, but Volkov would be tough. I don't know that I like Almeida's just so doggedly into the takedowns. But even then, Almeida's had a few issues. Dude, I like Pereira's chances against Tybura. Tybura's a big guy. But Spivak? I don't hate his chances against Spivak. I would pick him to beat Tuivasa. I would pick him to beat Rozenstruik. Would I pick him to beat Derek Lewis? Probably at this point. Romanov's another interesting one because he's just a cannon for 5 minutes and then that all falls apart. De Lima might be a bit much on the ground. Overly committed to it. I kind of like his chances against Nascimento. But that's kind of the point, right? It's heavyweight. It's kind of a wasteland. It's actually not quite as bad a wasteland as light heavyweight in general, but it's not a great division. It just isn't. Sorry. You could easily let that man throw one of those people out there. Throw an unranked guy out there. No one cares. You have a bunch of, for want of a better expression, donks out there at this weight class. Let him do it. Let him try his hand at heavyweight. We let Anderson Silva fight James Irvin back in the day. Do something similar. What do you got to lose? I'd say let him try. Like, again, why not? This guy is doing something that is very rare. Um, Somebody brought up, a lot of people, like, could Pereira be a three-weight world champion? Could he win the heavyweight belt? I don't know. I don't like his chances against either John Jones or Tom Aspinall. Let me start there. But I don't think it's impossible for him to win. I'm going to say either of those. He'd have a real. John is just such a. One, there's actually a lot of unknown still about John. But, again, would I favor Tom Aspinall to beat him? Yes, I would. Would it utterly destroy my worldview if he beat Tom Aspinall? It would not. Again, not likely, I don't think. But you're going to tell me that that guy's got no chance? I don't believe that he's got no chance. I do not believe that. Again, I don't like his chances to accomplish that, but he might be uniquely positioned to make that happen. So we'll keep an eye on that, but great win for Pereira. Great moment to not much of a fight. Again, not a whole lot of action until the knockout, but certainly not a bad 3 minutes. Um, Good on Pereira, man. Tough loss for Hill, but we'll see how he rebounds. I still think he's still clearly got a lot of ability, so we'll see how he rebounds. But that was your main event. Really good moment to cap off the night. Co-main event, not a whole lot. I shouldn't say not a whole lot to talk about here. Zhang Weili defeats Yan Xiaonan via unanimous decision. 49-45 across the boards. I was 49. Was that 49-44? I might have been. Yeah, I was, because I gave Zhang Weili two 10-8s. So a couple of curious things here. So first round comes out. Yan has fast hands. She's able to land a few punches, but ultimately gets taken down and is a little bit out of her depth with Zhang on the mat. This plays out for the rest of the fight. But in the first round, at the end of it, Zhang grabs a really tight rear naked choke. And we're near the end of the round, and so Yan does not tap, for the record. But Zhang technically puts her to sleep. Zhang then lets go. Buzzer sounds, ref, break. She lets go. And Yan is mostly out. She kind of takes a second and then staggers up. And the referee, in this case Jason Herzog, goes, okay, let's, your corner's over there. We're going to continue. I don't agree with his decision here. To the best of my knowledge here, and maybe there's some obscure rule that I'm not aware of here, but you can't be saved by the bell. If you are unconscious when the round ends, you lose. Doesn't matter. Now, it's very obvious when it's done via strikes. It's actually easier to recover from being choked out than knocked out. That shouldn't be a surprise. One involves concussive force. The other involves a brief cessation of oxygen to the brain, which can be fatal if held on for too long, but in short order, you can recover from that. But the point there is, if you're out at the end of a round, you're done. You can't be saved by the bell like that. So I don't agree with the referee's decision. Now, Jason Herzog, whenever people kind of get pissy at some of his calls, is frequently going, okay, so what bet did you lose because of how I handled that? And I'm not saying it's not funny on occasion, but it's a little. He felt a little touchy at the end of this one. And again, I don't agree with his ruling, but I'm not the ref. He is, so I'm just for the record. I disagree. That's just me. And I did not have any money riding on this. That's just. And once again, the other point here, if there's another like wrinkle to that rule that I am not aware of, that more clearly defines how he should have behaved and that he followed that, then okay. This is my understanding of things. So, second round, Jan recovers fairly quickly between rounds. There was a bit of a moment because after you've been choked out, you're trying to get your head back and wake up. It's certainly possible. Again, if you're blood choked out, you recover fairly quickly. But recovery between rounds of a title fight is not the same as recovery in class. And the cut man, there was a brief bit where they thought, wait, did he give her smelling salts? Which I believe would be against the rules. I do not believe MMA provisions allow for the use of smelling salts. Now, the actual cut man clarified, no, there were no smelling salts used. There's a physiological trick. You push on the base of the nose. And there's something about how it like messes with a little bit of like the openings of the nasal passages. It gets your breathing going. It's just messing with your body. Same like one of the reasons you may remember in old cartoons, if someone was going to stop somebody else from sneezing, finger under the nose, you're compressing that same kind of spot, and it does something to you. It can kind of like do something with your breathing. So if he's kind of tricking the you know respiratory system into resetting a little bit, clearly nothing wrong with that. Like again, that's just a little physiological trick. But anyway, so there was a little bit of a question around that for a bit until it got clarified later in the fight. But Zhang gets a fairly quick takedown in the second and spends the entire round beating up Yan. They could have stopped this fight in the second. Everyone gave it a 10-8 for Zhang. Not a stoppage from the referee. And this one, bear in mind, when I say they could have stopped it, I am not out here saying that it was a big should have been stopped. Zhang has the back and is throwing in right hands. And Zhang's a strong woman, so there's a little bit of heat on these, to be sure, but it's not, you're not really getting big concussive force, and Yan isn't really conceding the position. Yes, she's back mounted, but she's not, she was flattened out a little bit early, but she never got stuck flattened out. She got back to her knees. She's scooting backwards, and if you don't know why that is, one of the ways to attack hooks is to take the leg on the same side as the hook. So again, because you don't really cross your ankles all that much, you're not supposed to at least. If you take that leg on that same side straight back, it can flatten out your hip and get the hook to slide up and off. Then you bring it back. Then you bring the knee back up, and again, it's a way of fighting hooks. So she was trying that, and she was moving enough to convince the ref not to stop it, and there was an arm triangle attempt in there that was pretty close. Again, at 10-8 for Zhang. Third round, Zhang looks a little tired. Yan is able to kind of fight. She kind of fights back into this. I think Zhang still won the third. Because I believe it was the fourth round that Yan Xiaonan won. Let me double check that real fast. No, it was the third. My apologies. I am misremembering. So third round, Zhang. We've seen this before from Zhang. Zhang does kind of the reverse bell curve with her cardio. She comes out hot and then drops in the third, drops a little bit of the fourth, but then kind of gets her second wind back into the fourth and into the fifth. So you can reverse bell curve on that. Some guys are the other way. They start slow, peak in the middle, and then drop off again. Um, which would be more the traditional bell curve. Some guys are steady. Some guys do the rocket thing where they start slow and speed up and get better over time. Some guys start real hot and go down. Those are kind of the main ones, right? You got the two that make the X, the two U's, and then the straight. Yeah, those are generally what uh, the way cardio manifests itself in fighting. And there's a heavy genetic component to that, actually, like which way you're gonna perform. But so Yan fights her way back, doesn't get taken down in this one, lands some good punches, technically drops Zhang a couple of times. She was timing a counter punch to the leg kick of Zhang very, very well. Zhang's leg kicks are, I'm not saying they're not powerful, but she takes a while to get back to her stance because of how she throws them, and she is very vulnerable to counters there. And Yan drilled into that fairly quickly. Fourth round, Zhang kind of starts off a little bit rough again, but gets her legs back under her, is able to start wrestling again. Just the better grappler. And then the fifth round, more of the same. Yeah, solid win for Zhang. I appreciate the heart that Yan Xiaonan showed off. She has fast hands, but there's still a lot of work to do on her game. Zhang, kind of by contrast, again, if she can find an area where she's better than you, she will exploit that, and bless her, that's how you're supposed to fight. But if you look at some of her fights, people are starting to get a handle on her tactically. There's still execution that has to go along with that, and her physical strength makes that difficult in some respects. But there's a lot of tape on her at this point, and there's actually a lot of tape on her being very good, and then showing some of the same kind of habits or where you can expect dips and then rises in her performance. I think a lot of coaches, in particular, are starting to figure her out. You still got to marry that on the night with a performance, but Lemos did not have a bad game plan for her. Yan did not have a bad. Again, there was some strategic understanding of Zhang that Yan had here. Elements of execution failed her along the way, but I don't think we're that far from somebody who knows what they're doing really having Zhang figured out. I don't know what's next for Zhang. Strawweight's a little bit in limbo here. I think Tatiana Suarez is hurt again. If she's healthy, that's the fight, full stop. But she's beaten Lemos. Andrade wants that rematch, but I don't think that goes well for her. I don't think it goes the same as last time, but yeah, strawweight, it's a little rough. I mean, if we look at that division, let me go down top to bottom here. Zhang is champion, then Yan Xiaonan, Tatiana Suarez, Amanda Lemos, Jessica Andrade, Virna Jandiroba, Marina Rodriguez, Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Ribas, Luana Pinheiro, Lupito Godinez, Tabitha Ricci, Angela Hill, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, Michelle Watterson Gomez, and Jillian Robertson. This is a division, I'm not saying it's bad, but boy does that need some new blood to really start rising to the occasion. Might be time to do a serious scouting effort for strawweight. Just throwing that out there. Okay. We finally come to it. It took an hour, jeez. Yeah, this is going to be a long one. Lightweight for the BMF belt, whatever value you want to give the trinket, which I imagine, if it gives you pay-per-view points, is quite valuable, actually. Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje. I mean, what do you say about this one? This wasn't quite what I expected. Which is not to say bad. In my head, this not just played out like who won, but in my head, this played a little bit differently. But what we got was still great. This was your fight of the night. I'll get to what put this over the top in a second. This was your fight of the night, and what else? I think there were only two other fights that were all that close, in all honesty. Prochazka and Rakic was close because that was the kind of fight that the UFC brass really likes, especially Dana for bigger guys. And Bobby Green and Jim Miller turned in a commendable, if hard to watch, fight at times. And I don't mean that as a negative. But those were the only two fights in competition really for fight of the night. And frankly, this deserved it. This is my fight of the year right now. I don't know whether or not that'll hold up throughout the next 8 months, but right now, this is your clubhouse leader. Great technique, some good strategy from both guys. Gaethje landing some really hard calf kicks, but he struggled to kind of build on that. Once again, Gaethje doesn't get his jab going until round 4, like back end of 3 and then 4. Real shame because his jab actually gave Max some problems. I think they officially did not give Gaethje a knockdown. I disagree. He dropped Max. It wasn't a, oh boy, he's badly hurt drop, but he hit him and he fell down. Was a legitimate drop. I don't agree. I almost wonder if there's not a little bit of like, well, let's try to keep Max's number intact about him never being knocked down. Because that should have been a knockdown. Not, once again, that is not the like, oh boy, he almost finished him knockdown. Gaethje landed a clean punch, it off-balanced Max and dropped him. Should have been a knockdown. All I'm saying. But for the most part in this fight, Max had about a perfect split. If you look at his targeting, it's like 33, 33, 33, head, body, and leg. His leg kicks weren't as strong as Gaethje's, but he just kind of kept touching. He was landing some side kicks to the leg and hip. Good choice. His defense was really on point. He was drawing Gaethje out, landing jabs, body and head, a lot of right hands to the body. Max Holloway just looked phenomenal here, all fight. Wins the first 3 rounds. Round 2 was close. Closer. I still gave it to Max. One of the judges gave the second to Gaethje, and I don't agree, but I don't think it's wholly out of line. Max was very well prepared for a lot of Gaethje's habits. Gaethje has a habit of ducking, and anytime Max could draw that out, he followed with a spinning back kick, which Daniel Cormier, bless him, is trying. Came out and said, that's a wrinkle in Max's game that he hasn't always had, or is new. Like, my man, I remember Max Holloway's first couple of fights. He's been throwing that for a long time. Like, that's been in his arsenal. He just hasn't thrown it all that often, all that recently, for what should be self-evident reasons given who he was fighting. But I remember him crushing guys with that to the body early in his career. I have watched Max Holloway's entire UFC career. I watched when he came in on short notice at 4-0 to fight Dustin Poirier and gave Poirier problems on the feet before Poirier took him down and caught him in a triangle armbar. Basically got a mounted triangle armbar, actually. Really nasty. But Max doing what he did to Poirier on the feet, it stood out immediately to me. I have watched his ups and downs. I picked him to beat Jose Aldo the first time they fought and the second. Max has always been a guy I love to watch fight. One of my favorites. At different times, he's been my favorite. The top spot fluctuates a little bit. I think it does for everybody. And Max wins this fight. He's winning this fight again, he drops the 4th. He comes back and he's winning the 5th. He hurts Gaethje a few times, but sorry, the point about the spinning back kick. Gaethje is ducking down, and that means instead of going to the body, it's got a chance of catching you in the head. And at the very end of the first round, Max does. And it busts Gaethje's nose. I don't know if it's full-on broken or just cracked, but it's bleeding now. My hunch is busted to some degree. And that messes with things for a little bit. Needs to be said, and I think it was the second round. Max poked Gagey in the eye twice. Didn't anymore after that, and I don't think it was the biggest determining factor in how the fight went. Does need to be acknowledged that it happened. But what sells this fight, like, it's a great fight already. The last bit of the fifth round, a fight Max is winning. He's up 3-1 on two scorecards. He's tied on the other, but he's won the fifth by this point. We're 10 seconds out, and he's won the fifth round to this point. So he's going to win this fight on the scorecards if this goes the distance. And Max Holloway does what Max Holloway does. He eats a punch at one point and then avoids a rolling thunder from Gagey and walks to the center of the cage and points at it. 10 seconds left, and you're going to stand toe-to-toe with one of the most dangerous, destructive strikers in the division? Darn right you are, because you're Max Holloway. And Gagey obliges, like, what's Gagey got to lose at this point? Yeah, he'll always fight you. And especially down, like, all right. And these two incredible fighters, for 9 seconds of the last 10 seconds of this fight, get close and they start throwing. And I say 9 of the last 10 because at the very end, Max Holloway with an overhand kind of chopping right catches Justin Gagey on the jaw and puts him out cold. Buzzer beater, knockout of the year, moment of the year, moment of the decade. A little bit hyperbolic there, maybe. Because that would have, I don't know, maybe not. To do that in the fifth round of a fight you're winning, to just be Max Holloway again and go, point of the ground, like, let's do it. When asked why he did it, part of his reasoning was, I know if the cards were flipped and Gagey was winning this, he would, in the last 10 seconds, he would have given me that same shot, which is probably true for the record. And, dude, Max Holloway was already a legend. Already was a legend of this. He's still only 33, and his career resurgence is remarkable. Not even 2 years ago, he lost 50-45 across the boards Alex Volkanovski in their third fight. He went 0-3 against Volkanovski. And for the record, take a minute and appreciate Alexander Volkanovski, will you? I know everybody's down on him from the back-to-back knockout losses, and he's also 35, and I don't know exactly what's next for him. I really don't. But dude beat Max Holloway 3 times. So before we get into the Volkanovski revisionism here, it was never all that good. That Max Holloway, this legend, this incomparable fighter, this warrior who just does things that you shouldn't do, and you don't do, and I don't even mean get away with, and Volkanovski beat him 3 times, and honestly, if they fought again, I think Volk would probably do similar. Like that, he just kind of has Max's number. And sometimes you find those guys. Doesn't mean that the great fighter is any less great because somebody we don't take away from Muhammad Ali because Ken Norton had his number and should have beaten him 3 times. But hey, judging in boxing at that time in particular, there was money in Ali, there wasn't money in Norton. And I think their third fight in particular was egregious. But that's neither here nor there. Like that, Joe Frazier is not a lesser all-time great because George Foreman was built in a factory to be the worst possible nightmare for that man. Joe Frazier's still Joe Frazier. And just because Max Holloway couldn't beat Volkanovski, Max Holloway is still Max freaking Holloway. This is one of those all-time MMA moments. Like, I've seen a few of those, folks. I remember Randy Couture coming out and dropping Tim Sylvia with the first punch he threw, then winning a decision, and I remember that. That's an all-time moment. It was announced on this event that the first fight between Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen is going into the Hall of Fame. I don't think, hot take, I don't think that's a Hall of Fame fight, but that is a Hall of Fame moment at the end of it, so you kind of got to take that. I remember that. That's an all-time moment. I've I've been around for a lot of these. What's another good one? Just all-time crazy moments. I got a few of them. Um, Nogueira and Bob Sapp. Let me go to Pride for a few of these. Nogueira and Bob Sapp was nuts. Vanderlei and Rampage 2. Boy, was that something special. The first Shogun and Dan Henderson fight. Like, what do you say about that? The last 30 seconds of this fight is all-time immortalized forever kind of material in MMA. Where exactly it falls, I don't know, but that is 100% an all-time moment. What a wonderful fight. What an incredible moment. Mark Coleman putting the BMF belt on Max. Fair enough. Yeah, I don't complain about that one iota either, for the record. Max, after the fight, going, I got plenty of options. I'll fight Ilia Topuria, or that lightweight guy who's made a name fighting featherweights, meaning Islam Makhachev. Dude, I don't even think a rematch with Connor's out of the question, just for the record. Assuming Connor actually does come back at some point. UFC's claiming he is. We'll get to that later. But once again, not even 2 years ago, or just about 2 years ago, Alexander Volkanovski comprehensively beat Max Holloway. Their first fight was competitive, but I thought fairly clear for Volk, 3-2. Their second fight was on a razor's edge, and 3-2 either way is fine. Their third fight was not close. And a lot of people, I'll throw myself in there, kind of thought, like, I don't know what you do next, man. Well, turns out, turn back a couple of tough featherweight challenges, and then move up to lightweight and knock Justin Gaethje out cold. That's what he did. That's what was next for Max Holloway. Again, I don't want to even. There were some people out there like trying to do revisionism on Israel Adesanya's title reign at middleweight. And I'm sorry, no, you horribly misguided people. That's the worst case scenario for Israel Adesanya, is that he's the second best middleweight in UFC history. Whether you want to rank him above Anderson Silva or not, I don't know. That's going to be somewhat personal preference and some really microscopic detail picking, I guess. And Dana White coming out at this one and going, yeah, Max is pretty much the greatest featherweight of all time, and like, I think Max's career in totality is exceptional. I don't know that his featherweight run was really good. I don't know that he's a better fighter than Jose Aldo, but I don't know that his career his just career at featherweight definitively overtook Aldo's. And he was not a better fighter than Alexander Volkanovski. But, man, is Max Holloway a legend. A living, breathing 33-year-old legend. Dude, Max Holloway is going to go into the UFC Hall of Fame more than once. Be clear about this. Let me tell you how many times he's getting in. He's getting in for himself. Straight up. No issues. That man's a first ballot, easiest call of all time. Put Max Holloway in the Hall of Fame. His first fight with Jose Aldo could go in. This fight's going in. I feel fairly confident in saying that. His second fight with Dustin Poirier could go in. Just the fight. You could put his fight with Brian Ortega in the UFC Hall of Fame just for the statistical beating that he put on, or the Cater one. They're one-sided. Like, there's not a lot of back and forth there. But what was the other great, just genuinely great fight that Max Holloway had? Because he's had several. You could put that. You could put the Pettis win, maybe. But like the Cub Swanson fight. Like, for a 3-round fight, that's really darn good. Here's my point. Dude, that fight with Yair Rodriguez was brutal. That was brutal. You could put that in there. Here's the point, though. He's going in on his own. Well deserved. At least one of his fights, if not 2 or 3, are going into. If there was a physical UFC Hall of Fame, this man should have his own wing. Like, that's what Max Holloway should have. I don't know what he does next. Logic would seem to dictate Topuria. I still might favor Topuria to win just slightly, but I don't know, man. Max is so good. He's so good. And my hat's off to Justin Gaethje for this fight. You know, dude had to overcome a busted nose and fight one of the best to ever do it, and had some moments. Genuinely had some moments. In fact, Max, between rounds at one point, I think it was either between 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, camera caught a bit of him talking with his corner man, and he just said, because he ate a left hook at one point, and said, Gaethje's got the hardest left hook in the world. I think Alex Pereira would disagree, but point being, like, Gaethje was not without moments of success here. He actually had a pretty good front kick going, again, nasty calf kicks. My hat is off to both these guys. Max Holloway, $600,000 richer because he not only got fight of the night, you're damn right he got a performance of the night for that. Dude, pay that. There should be another zero after Max Holloway's paycheck for this one. Gaethje too, for the record. But, and yeah, I know that means $6 million. I don't care. If Max Holloway were in a boxing ring, this man would be a multi-millionaire and incredibly, if he was doing comparable work in boxing to what he's doing in MMA, that man is an action hero world champion and is, again, multi-millionaire. Many, many times over. I saw someone joke, like, sell Power Slap and whatever you can get for that piece of crap, give all that money to Max Holloway. Yes. What a fight. What a moment. What a knockout. Like, everybody and their dog lost their mind over this. You can see the reaction shots from people in the crowd. You can see everyone who was live streaming, Demetrius Johnson's reaction to it, Alexander Volkanovski's reaction to it. Stephen Thompson, you can see some MMA pundits react to it. Like Luke Thomas was live streaming this. People lost their minds because we've had a great fight, and then suddenly it's Rock'em Sock'em Robots Roadhouse action, and then Max Holloway lands the kill shot of all kill shots. People lost their minds. I was speechless. What do you say about that, man? That you can't, that I haven't already said, or that other people might not say more eloquently than I. That was the stuff of legend. That that will be immortalized. And I mean immortalized. I've talked a lot about how MMA does a bad job of propagating its history. Whereas boxing doesn't have that problem. Boxing always has older heads who will tell newer fans, here's a fighter that you may never have heard of. Go watch their fights. Here's a hand. Hey, go watch everything the Four Kings did. Thank me later. I did that with my brothers not too long ago. I told them, like, hey, first of all, go watch Hagler Hearns. Then watch Tommy Hearns knock out Roberto Duran. Oh, Tommy Hearns, by the way. Daniel Cormier calling him incorrectly, getting his nickname. Just got his nickname wrong. Oh, yeah. I just. It was just Tommy the Hitman Hearns, man. Adding in, the Detroit Hitman or the Motown Hitman. No, he was the Motor City Cobra for a while for places that didn't want to call him the Hitman. He was just the Hitman. But, Daniel Cormier gonna Daniel Cormier. Um, but boxing has that. They have the guys who will tell the younger fighters, here's the legendary fighters, here's the legendary fights. Watch, learn, become more educated about the sport, know the history, know the players. MMA doesn't really have that to the extent that it does. And we all, those of us who are still around, need to be better stewards of this history because there's less and less of us that have been around for a long time every year. This is one of those fights and one of those moments that we all need to make sure we're going to tell, if we're going to tell the legend of Max Holloway, this is one of those fights that you have to put out there. One of them that you must see this fight. Once again, my hat is off to these two guys. It was remarkable. And I can only say thank you. As a jaded MMA fan who's a little bit cynical about the sport at the moment, who's been talking about it for a long time, writing about it for a long time, who's seen most of the people that I used to watch fights with fall away. Thank you to Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway for reminding me just how spectacular this whole enterprise can be. Thank you. All right. Next up, Arman Tsarukyan defeats Charles Oliveira 29-28 twice, split decision, and then won 29-28 for Oliveira. First round goes to Oliveira. He trips up Tsarukyan on a kick, gets a mounted guillotine choke that is real close to finishing things. Tsarukyan survives. Second round, Tsarukyan gets a takedown. He's actually doing good work on the feet. He's throwing a nice body kick. And one of the reasons when I talked about the preview of this one, like, if you are not terrified of Oliveira's guard, you can get work done from there. Oliveira's ground game, a lot of it does rely on a little bit of space. Being able to invert for legs, switch from there to the arm, like just motion. If you can smother that, you can do work. So Tsarukyan smothered that, beat him up from top position for most of the second round, wins that pretty clearly. Third round is close. A little bit of action back and forth on the feet. Tsarukyan gets a takedown, doesn't do a whole lot with it. And then waning seconds of the fight, Oliveira scrambles up, grabs it at Darce, and doesn't really finish it. It doesn't get all that close. He can't quite get the angle, but it's maybe the most meaningful thing that happens all round. And ultimately, again, we're split 29-28. 2-1 either way is a perfectly justifiable scorecard. I wish this fight had 5 rounds. I really wish this had been the main event of their New Jersey card. Um, you know, give these two a couple of more rounds. In theory, this should crown the next title challenger. I'm not saying Soryukin is not the next title challenger, sort of according to the UFC, but his next fight might still be for the belt. According to him and his manager backstage, the UFC said, "Hey, how's 302 sound?" And I'm like, no, not quite gonna work for us. So that fight is going another direction because Islam Makhachev will be fighting at UFC 302, and we'll get to that after this. Some of the fight announcements, but everything that I was kind of worried about for Charles Oliveira played out here. Saryukian becoming a bit more aggressive on the feet is a nice development for him. He's not as one-dimensional as he used to be. He used to be very reliant on his wrestling. Now, it's still kind of what he's most known for and his biggest skill, but it's not his only skill, and that's a nice development for him. I still don't know if I like his chances against Makhachev, but can't say he hasn't, been putting in the work either, so. And kicking off the main card, Bo Nickel got a second-round submission win, 3:38 of the second, over Cody Brundage. Nickel was not impressed with his own performance. Went 50% on his takedowns, 3 of 6. Not a whole lot here. Nickel, this was a good win, but, the man was, at different times, a minus 2,100 favorite, and it wasn't quite that. So, a good enough win. I think the big thing with him, honestly, might be activity. There's a lot you can do in the gym, but I think he needs some more reps in the cage. And they got to try and keep him busy, would be my hunch there. Yeah, not a whole lot to say there. That was the main card. Kind of long. You had Max and Gaethje go basically the distance, and then Zhang and Yan did go the distance. And Saryukian and Oliveira went the distance. It was long, but I'm not complaining. There was some really good stuff. There was some great stuff there. As for the prelims, Yuri Prochazka defeats Alexander Rakic via TKO punches, 3:17 of the second. Alexander Rakic looked good. Let me start there. He was landing some heavy calf kicks that actually bothered Prochazka a little bit. He was landing punches. He's a really fundamentally sound fighter. He's actually got good hand speed for a big guy, good accuracy. Yuri Prochazka is just a madman. And I don't mean that unkindly. He ate some big shots that would have seriously hurt a lot of guys in this weight class. And then he turned this into a dogfight, and that favors him. And he just ate some punches, slipped a couple, landed a few hard ones, got Rakic hurt. He just did what he normally does, and he was at a technical deficiency, but he forced Rakic to fight not a technical fight. This was actually a fun little fight for as long as it lasted, so yeah, I don't get to say that about light heavyweight very often. Yuri probably going to get a title shot next because the division doesn't have a lot of challengers. And I wouldn't hate a rematch between him and Pereira. It's not like their first fight was a blowout or boring. So, and for Rakic, this was always, look, Yuri's a tough fight no matter what. Your first fight back after a long layoff due to knee injury, and to look as good as he did, I am not throwing in the towel on Rakic yet. I still think that guy might have something there that can go a lot further. We'll just see how he rebounds from this. Featherweight, Aljamain Sterling defeats Calvin Kattar via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. This fight sucked. Man, Dana White couldn't help but bury Aljamain Sterling. Tweeted after this fight, like, Aljamain Sterling owes me 300K after that one. Um, what did I think of Sterling's featherweight debut? Couple of things here. I'm still not sold on a lot of the questions I had about how is Sterling going to deal with some of the conditions that he has relied upon being taken away. He fought okay at long range, but there were periods of time, especially after a grappling exchange, where he was just backing up and moving away from Kattar. Kattar's offense was muted. Kattar looked rusty. Looked like a guy who'd been out for 2 years, and he was. I think if there was something that I got wrong in kind of how I predicted this one, I don't think I weighed the layoff as heavily as I should, which is always difficult. Ring rust doesn't affect every fighter every time, but it does affect most fighters most of the time. And I think it played a role here. Kattar did a great job of neutralizing a lot of Sterling's offensive attacks, but he didn't have much offense of his own. At featherweight, Sterling, he's thick. He's got some oomph there to his muscle. His game just still seems kind of the same. And there are guys in this division that are going to be a real problem for him when his plan A doesn't work, his plan B is still very loose. Again, anytime if Kattar either blocked a takedown or escaped, Sterling would spend the next little bit just backing up and moving away, not even really throwing back. So there's still some questions there, but, beating Calvin Kattar is nothing to sneeze at. I saw some people mention, maybe Volkanovski wants if Volkanovski's going to look for some kind of, bounce back fight, Volkanovski and Sterling, not the craziest thing in the world. And I don't think I agree with that. It's not the craziest thing in the world. So, something to consider. Yeah, the fight, not really worth watching. Oh, sorry. Women's bantamweight, Kayla Harrison runs over Holly Holm. Good grief. Rear naked choke, 147 of the second. 10-8 first round for Kayla Harrison. I mean, second round doesn't even go long enough, but was looking the same. Man. Okay. I said I didn't quite see Holly as a minus or a plus 300 underdog. I was very mistaken about that. Don't get me wrong, I picked Kayla either way, but here's the thing about this. There's a couple of things here, actually. I've seen a few people do why didn't Holly just, keep moving and, use her exceptional boxing and some kicks and if there is a weird phenomenon with Holly Holm, and I don't quite know how to explain this. Or explain how it came about, but let me describe it. People really liked her knocking out Ronda Rousey, or were very that's a big moment. That's a huge moment in the history of the sport. That version of Holly, even that version, clinched with Ronda briefly. But people really loved that version of her. And then, her fight with Miesha Tate where she lost late in the fifth, wasn't exactly a terrible fight. And so there's a vision that people have built in their head of Holly Holm. And it just, for some reason, even if you watch some of her fights and some of them weren't good, you kind of got like amnesia about them. You forgot they existed. People forgot that her fight with, oh, what the heck was her name? I don't want to look it up, but Betch Correia. That fight sucked. And then Holly Holm head kicked Correia into unconsciousness. People remember the head kick. They don't remember how much the fight sucked. Or, Holly's last several fights have featured a lot of clinch work and a lot of fence wrestling. I mean, a lot. It's almost to the point where she kind of can't help herself. So she clinched with Kayla Harrison. Boy, was that a mistake. Kayla threw her very quickly. I give Holly credit on the first one, actually. She swept that. Like, that throw lands, but there's a thing about judo throws. If you watch competitive judo, you'll see this. There's so much force going that they almost never, if they hit a big throw, something that's like full ippon, they never secure position because they don't need to. That's the match. Watch those and watch what happens immediately after. You frequently get rolled, and you wind up in a bad position if that didn't end the match. Kind of happened here. Now, Kayla, because she is very good and very strong, I mean, look, Kayla made weight. She looked like death on that scale. Like, this is clearly not a weight class that she can. I'm not saying she'll never make it again. I'm saying this is not a long-term weight class for her. That is a brutal cut. She can do it, which I was skeptical about. I was a little bit skeptical about that one. But, like, this is not something she's going to do, like, 7 times over the next, like, 2 years, would be my hunch. But she rehydrated, and that woman, she's always been big. I mentioned to you guys when I previewed this, like, her judo career took place at, like, 170 pounds. Like 174, I think, something like that, when you do the kilo to pound conversion. Like, this is, and none of that is fat. She is yoked. Joe Rogan mentioned in this one, like, they're clinching against the fence, and he gets a good look at Kayla's back, and like, man, it looks like Vitor Belfort's back. I don't know that I go that far. Mostly because Vitor was full of all kinds of stuff. But yeah, that dude, she is yoked. She's jacked. She's a big girl in that respect. She is very strong. And she gets on top of Holly and just spends 4 minutes basically elbowing her. Um, Holly, I think, was given 2 total strikes in the first round, which might be a little generous. I mean, a total wipeout. Second round, more of the same. Quick throw from Kayla. Land strikes, gets the back, gets the choke. You could give her a title shot off of this, mostly because that division sucks. I mean, I had to take a minute and go, wait a minute. If she were to fight for the belt, who would she be fighting? Oh, yeah, Raquel Pennington. I'm not trying to denigrate Raquel Pennington here, much as her fight with Buena Silva sucked. She's not the first UFC. That is not the first UFC title fight to suck. It will not be the last. I don't even know that that's the worst UFC title fight ever. Because that's still like I don't know if the second fight between Rose Namajunas and Carla Esparza is worse than the third fight between Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovsky. But like those are kind of, if you want to get weird, you could go to like the second Shamrock Severin fight where they're in Michigan and we're told at the last minute they couldn't punch, and yeah, that was a whole thing. I almost give that one a pass because, that super fight and then like Dark Ages stuff. But so my point there, like I'm not here to pile on Raquel Pennington. She won the fight, and it's not her fault that division sucks. And but like, do I give Raquel Pennington much of a chance against Kayla Harrison? No, not really. Like the only thing of note was Amanda Nunes did a thing where she's like posing in front of the TV and hey, I might be interested in fighting Kayla. Dude, why'd you leave if you were just gonna unretire this quickly, Amanda? Ugh. But you know, MMA retirements, right? But in all seriousness, like if Kayla fights Raquel, like who you picking there? Uh, I'm not trying to say Raquel Pennington sucks because I don't think she sucks. But I know where I'm leaning, and it ain't by a little bit. Featherweight Diego Lopez defeats Sadiq Youssef, 129 of the first with punches. Um, yeah, Diego Lopez is good. Um, hurts Youssef with an overhand right. Youssef recovers. They clinch up. It's a really nice sequence, actually. Right uppercut to the right kind of, stabbing punch to the body, then right uppercut to the chin. Drops Youssef again. Lopez is good. That man is good. He wants a rematch with Movsar Evloev. I'm not opposed to that at this point. He gave Evloev a tough fight on short notice. Like I don't hate that. Lopez is good. Lightweights, Renato Moicano. You know what? First of all, brief shout out to Moicano's post-fight speech, where he once again expressed his love for America, which fair enough. I mean, I live here. I'm certainly, I think well of my country. Doesn't mean doesn't mean perfect, because no place is, but I choose to live here. I could live elsewhere if I wanted to. I choose to live here. And then set, warn like, you gotta, if you want to, know about some of the stuff you need to watch out, like read Ludwig von Misses. Ah, sorry, the name escapes me. Yeah, Misses. I'm probably mispronouncing that. For those of you who don't know, Ludwig von Mises was like a economist, an economist, historian, logician, sociologist, famous for like one of the founding fathers of classical liberalism and the Austrian School of Economics. Very rare you hear a UFC fighter kind of shout out 1900, like early 1900s, or like uh, old school like economic figures. So caught me a little off guard, in all honesty. But you know what? You could do worse than taking that onto your reading list. I'm not saying you have to agree with everything. From that economic theory, or even his like political theories. Again, classical liberalism not bearing too much of a resemblance to contemporary liberalism. I mean, in theory, there's underlying connections, but contemporary liberalism is, in some respects, much like contemporary conservatism, drifting to the extremes, and some of the founding ideologies and thought processes behind both of those philosophies don't bear a whole lot of resemblance to some of what's going on in some of their current implementation. That's all I'm saying about that, and that's as close as I'm getting to political on the subject. So Jalen Turner drops Renato Moicano hard near the end of the first round with a left hand and tries to do the walk-off. And don't get me wrong, Moicano is badly hurt, but he gets up. And Turner then turns to kind of like go back after him, and he just looks at the ref like, really? Look, he's out on his feet, and then misses a punch. And Moicano survives the round. Still loses it, but survives. He got a takedown pretty early, and Turner on the ground is still a work in progress, is maybe the polite way to say that. Second round, Moicano gets him down again. Gets dominant position, pounds him out. Yeah, I maybe should have given Moicano more of a chance than I did. I mean, even that being said, like if Jalen Turner hadn't made a very boneheaded decision, even if you don't want to go down into Moicano's guard after you drop him, don't turn around and do the walk-off. Back up. Stay focused. If you want him back up, make him get up quickly and then get back on him. Try to hit him again. Don't try the walk-off. Don't then appeal to the ref. Like, if the referee says you're going to keep fighting, even if it's a stupid call by the ref, you got to keep going. Yell at the ref later if you feel like yelling at the ref later. But you got to keep fighting. So, you know what? Good win for Moicano. Dude is settling into lightweight. He's a pretty big guy. I mentioned before. Like, he's 5'11". He's not a small guy for that weight class. Let's see. Next up, Jessica Andrade defeated Marina Rodriguez via split decision, 29-28. Yeah, that's about right. Everything at distance, not surprising. Rodriguez is doing better. She's a better technical striker. But Andrade got her down in the first round and was just stronger and better on the ground, passed her guard, landed some good stuff. Second round, I think, was the one that was all on the feet. And Rodriguez just did better work. Third round, little back and forth. Could have gone either way. Like I said, I'm not complaining about 29-28 either way. Andrade just, even when she was outgunned technically, but she just hits so hard. Like, there's just so much force behind what she does that when she would hit Rodriguez fairly cleanly, Rodriguez would just react not great. And again, I actually scored it for Andrade, not by a huge margin, but I did score it for her, so there was that. Lightweight Bobby Green defeated Jim Miller via unanimous decision, 30-27, 30-25, and 29-26. I actually thought Miller had the first round, but some of what he does kind of started to fall apart. Much as I love Jim Miller, he does enter on a lot of straight lines, and Bobby Green started to punish him for it. Second round, Green's jab gets moving a lot. Just outstrikes him comprehensively, busts up his right eye. Third round, a lot more of the same. Then near the end of the round, he does the point at the ground thing, and, come on, let's go. Miller steps into oblige and eats a 1-2 that drops him. Third round, pretty clearly 10-8. You could have stopped that. Miller does just enough to prevent the ref from stopping it. Again, not a bad fight here. Hard to watch down the stretch, especially if you like Jim Miller, but I kind of knew I was going to get that one wrong prediction-wise. I accept that, my emotional picking of Jim Miller is what it is. Reports of Bobby Green's demise after he got sparked by Turner, a little bit exaggerated, a little bit premature. And kicking everything off, Davison Figueiredo chokes out Cody Garbrandt, 4:02 of the second, rear naked choke. Garbrandt did not look bad here in the first round. He didn't land anything like stupendous, but he was doing generally the better of the striking, had the faster hands. His hand speed is still remarkable. But Figueiredo, good enough defensively, landed a couple of shots of his own, got a takedown. Near the end of the round, not enough to sway it back in Figueiredo's favor. Garbrandt wins the round. But Was a bit of a sign of things to come. Figueiredo's second round, a little bit of exchange on the feet, gets the back, standing, drives things to the fence. A little bit of the old cheese donkey is how I've always heard it. I think more appropriately it's called a broomstick takedown, but it's basically if I'm on your back or on your hip, my hang on. So if I'm hypothetically, if I'm on like your left hip, my left leg goes in front of your left leg and then hooks behind your right leg, and then you kind of use that as your leverage point for it. I heard someone call it a cheese donkey once, and it amused me so much. That's what I call this takedown. So if you happen to be reading or listening to me talk about like a cheese donkey, like, some of these have really weird names. Some of them have multiple names, and I just go with the ones that amuse me. So, uh, you got to go with that. But um, Figueiredo, once he got on top, like, got that takedown, got the back, transitioned to mount. His mount was very strong. Garbrandt struggled to try and get out of it. Tried real hard. The cage played a factor here, but as he explodes trying to get out of there, nice back take from Figueiredo, gets the choke. So I think I have a kind of a feel for Figueiredo now at bantamweight, believe it or not. Only 2 fights there, but hear me out. Figueiredo's always been good on the ground. Look at some of his earlier flyweight fights. Like, the man knows what he's doing down there. But I think the cut to flyweight meant that the energy expenditure for a concerted wrestling slash grappling attack was not really something he could commit to. So he did a lot more marauding on the feet, and dude had power at flyweight, tore up people's bodies. I'd actually like to see him go back a little bit to that at bantamweight, a little bit more body work. But he relied a little bit on that, just kind of being this bruiser who wasn't really troubled by most of what you were throwing at him, would hit you really hard, and those were his takedowns for the most part at flyweight. He would hurt you. At bantamweight, he's still got power. I don't think he has quite the same. Let me phrase this. It's not. I don't mean that his power is diminished going up to bantamweight, but guys at bantamweight are a little bit used to bigger power in ways that some of the flyweights weren't. There are guys at bantamweight with serious pop. So while Figueiredo still has good power, it's not, because of the weight class shift, it's not quite as unilaterally destructive. But his chin's good. He's still willing to fight. He does have power. And I think being in this weight class, he is more comfortable going to his wrestling. And his top game, his ground and pound, his passing, it's very good. It's not a thing he used all that consistently at flyweight for, again, I think good reasons. Some of it was, strategic gas tank management. Some of it was his strongest assets in that weight class. Like, there's guys at flyweight who just scramble all day long, and I don't think that was the kind of thing he could afford to get into. But at bantamweight, and I don't mean there aren't guys that can scramble at bantamweight, but I think he's figured out that, okay, if I can really hurt you on the feet, I will. But I'm strong, and he is strong. And at this weight class, I think this is a new wrinkle that he can lean into. And because he took Rob Font down a lot in their fight when he won that. I don't think that's an accident. I'm not saying he's afraid of the power of guys punching back at him at bantamweight. I think he sees an area where at this weight class, this is something else he can try. And it's working for him. This Figueiredo could be a problem at bantamweight. I mean, beating Rob Font alone is a pretty big deal. Beating Cody Garbrandt, Garbrandt's current streak has not been great. I mean, I know he'd kind of like they'd given him a couple of rebound fights that he'd done okay in, but it's a former champion, and it's kind of this was almost more a resume builder for Figueiredo. Um, Bantamweight's a very good division, so I don't know if he'll ever be champion here. I was very skeptical about that for a while when he was like first moving up. I'm less skeptical of that now than I was then. Um, he really he changed some of his game to accommodate the new weight class, and he's not a small bantam. He's not undersized for bantamweight. He's a little on the smaller end of bantamweight, but he's not the shortest guy in that weight class, and he's clearly, got the physical strength to hang. So again, he might be, more average to slightly smaller, but there is a world of difference between being on the smaller end of a weight class and being undersized. And he is not undersized for bantamweight. He might be a problem for that weight class. He's gonna beat some other ranked guys. I don't know exactly which ones, but he's gonna beat some of them, and he might fight for that belt. And I don't know that I don't know that I love his chances against guys like Marab, or I don't know that I would love his chances against Piotr Jan. Heck, I don't know that I would favor him over Song Yadong, but I'm not discounting him in any of those fights. Not at all. He's gonna beat some big time bantamweights. That not saying title, not saying he's gonna, beat all of them. There's some very tough fights for him there. It's a very tough division. But I do feel pretty confident saying there's some of these fights that he's gonna take on in top bantamweights, and there's some of them he's gonna beat. He is good. He was good already, and he seems to have very quickly figured out how he's going to fight in this weight class, and that's a big deal. Some guys, when they transition weight classes, try to do what they were doing before, and most of the time, that doesn't quite work for a lot of reasons. He figured out very quickly, I think, that I can't fight exactly the same as I did at flyweight, but I can tweak that just a little bit, and he is a very dangerous guy to fight in that weight class. That I feel very confident saying. So, yeah, that's it. That's UFC 300. Heck of a card. Heck of a card. Mentioned already, but for the record, your bonuses: fight of the night, Gagey Holloway, easy call. Performances: Max Holloway, Yuri Prochazka. Feel bad for a couple of people here. What do I feel bad for? Um, I kind of feel bad for Pereira. You could have easily gone him instead of Prochazka for a performance. Green and Miller, I hope they got something extra in the back. I really do, because that was a heck of a fight. Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez might have really been the one that got the short end of the stick here. I mean, you could go Kayla Harrison, but Lopez beating Yusuf is ultimately, I think, more impressive than Harrison beating Holm at this point. So Lopez is the other guy I feel bad for. But that's where we are. Great night of fights. And an all-time moment in there. Just It's kind of a pity they didn't wind up just making Max and Gagey the main event. That would have been the perfect capstone. We got two fights after it that, they weren't bad. I'm not going to say they were bad, but the emotional peak was Gagey and Holloway. All right, my full report, it's in the MMA Zone of 4mania.com. Oh, if you want to just see the end of Gagey and Holloway, it's on the UFC's YouTube channel. Look it up, thank me later. I mentioned already the UFC does not have an event this Saturday. They're taking the 20th off. They're back on the 27th with a card. We lost Joel Alvarez and Mateusz Rebecki there. Now they got 2 weeks to find somebody else. That sucks. I was looking forward to that one. I mentioned already, like this upcoming card, it's not the worst. It's not the best. It's clearly, warehouse fights. But there's a handful of things in here that, we can find a few diamonds in that particular rough. So next week we'll preview that. All right, what else do we? Sorry, wrong button, everyone. I think the only other thing I have here for news, I will check Twitter as always, but post UFC 300, Dana White announced a few fights. For UFC 303, Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler, I don't care. Y'all know I'm kind of checked out on all of this. For those two. I think he mentioned 170. Look, my stance on the UFC announcing fights at this point is I don't believe them until they're independently corroborated. The UFC has more than once announced fights that aren't signed. So take all this with as much salt as you feel necessary, but this is the first time they've actually given a date, a firm event for Conor Chandler. So we'll see. I don't care. Other people do. God bless. I don't care. I do care. UFC 302. They're in. Where is that one? That Jersey? Let me check. Yeah, Newark. Currently, presumptive main event for the lightweight title. Islam Makhachev defends against Dustin Poirier. Again, according to Arman Saryukian's manager. Backstage after he beat Oliveira, they were offered that date and that fight. I don't blame them for not taking a very short. Look, it's sorry, my brain cannot do math. It's the 13th of April to June 1st. Like that's only what 1, 2, 3, 4. That's only 6 weeks. Yeah, I don't blame them for saying that's not quite going to work. So the UFC then said Poirier. And, look, if Gagey had beaten Max, maybe, dude, Max, they could have gone with Max, but it seems like they're going to lean towards Max and Topuria. Ilia Topuria certainly seemed to think so. And heck, who's going to complain about Holloway and Topuria, right? That's a heck of a fight. Oh, I forgot to mention about Bobby Green. He called out Paddy Pimblett. Okay. I think he hurts Paddy, but I don't care either. It's the hurt business, right? So there was that. So Makhachev and Poirier, UFC 302. Good fight. I'm not going to complain about it. If Poirier pulls that off, man, that will be an all-time feel-good moment. Certainly for the last several years for MMA, which has not given us a whole lot of those. Also for UFC 302 announced, co-main event, Paulo Costa, Sean Strickland. Given the UFC's history of announcing Paulo Costa fights that haven't been signed, once again, I'll wait for everyone to confirm, but Both guys seem amenable to that fight, and you know what? For a co-main event, I don't hate it. I don't hate that one at all. Yeah, so those were the major fight announcements. Let me double check real quick that I didn't forget any others. Um, yeah, a lot of these have not gotten full-on things. Okay, so they did mention for May 18th, as a fight night at the Apex. Main event there, Edson Barboza and Lerone Murphy. Okay, I can live with that. What else is on that card? Ooh, Tim Elliott and Tetsuro Taira. Let's see if they can get on the main card this time for Taira. It's a good fight. Adrian Yanez is back. Temba Gorimbo and Ramiz Brahimai. That's not terrible. That's kind of it. That's a fairly standard Apex card at the moment, so not great. Joaquin Buckley crashing the UFC presser. It's not a presser, it's a pep rally. But getting in line with the fans to ask questions, to ask Dana to, hey, give me the main event for the St. Louis card. Instead, no one wants to see Derek Lewis and Rodrigo Nascimento. Look, man, Joaquin Buckley is a man of the people. I don't want to watch Derek Lewis and Rodrigo Nascimento, certainly not for 5 rounds. That card, that's not a great card. What's interesting there? Maybe Carlos Ulberg and Alonzo Menafield? No, that's not interesting. Again, Lewis and Nascimento I do not care about. Derek Lewis still being used as a draw these days is just a damning indictment on all parties, including the fans, by the way, who buy the tickets. Alex Caceres and Sean Woodson. I don't hate that. Chase Hooper and Vyacheslav Borshev. Slava Claus. Meh. Robelis Despain and they're giving him Waldo Cortez Acosta. That's a thing. Thought they might wait on that one. I thought they might give Despain a few more lower end guys. They seem to like Cortez Acosta, so that's a little bit not a direction I thought they'd go with the matchmaking. I mean, doing the UFC doing the we don't pad people's records here, like, buddy, I've seen your matchmaking at times. Bull. If you like a fighter, you don't make it hard on them. There's a degree to which you can argue there's no such thing as an easy fight in the UFC, certainly not a gimme. But I have seen more than once you give preferential treatment. Like, that's a thing I've seen. It doesn't usually last forever, but pretending that you never do it it's disingenuous. Any others really get kind of fleshed out here? No, this card still needs a main event. Yeah, that still needs a main event. And then we get too far out to really kind of do a lot of digging into that. So, yeah, that's it for that. All right, let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy is broken in the MMA space. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here. All right. Nope, nothing new, so plugs. What do I got this week? Monday. So probably at the same time you're listening to this. Myself, Mark Radulich, and there's somebody else joining us. I want to say there was, but I don't want to swear to it. Yeah, myself, Mark Radulich, and Chris Owen, I think, from the Movies That Don't Suck and Some That Do podcast. We will be talking about Alex Garland's A24 movie that just came out, Civil War. So tune in for that. It seems to be getting a decent amount of buzz, so, Haven't seen it yet. I'll watch it before we review it. Last week there was no Damn You Hollywood. Week before that was Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire. Give that a listen if you're so inclined. Week after will be Abigail, so, we're doing what we can this month. It's kind of a weak month. But cautiously optimistic for Civil War, so tune in for a discussion on that one. What else? I'm not on any of those other shows. No, I'm not. I might be. I'm on backup duty for one of them, but okay. Then my usual spate of wrestling coverage because there's no MMA event on Saturday. So WWE SmackDown on Friday. Covered the last one. I cover that pretty much every Friday, unless something weird happens in my personal life. So tune in for that if you're interested in professional wrestling, and we will be back here next week to preview UFC. They're on ESPN for this one, right? Yeah, UFC on ESPN 55. They're in the warehouse, but they're on ESPN. So we'll give a full preview to that event next week. All right. Till then, thank y'all very, very much as always for listening. I appreciate you. A little over 2 hours. I'll take it. I was worried this was going to be super long, but no, I can live with this. Hopefully you can too. All right. See you next time. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.